Hi everyone, welcome to our video on our CV template. This is a template that we created for people to use when they fill out their academic credentials and they want to apply to academic jobs. This template is available on oxfordandbridge.com, so please go ahead and take a look there where you could download the full template and other great resources. We wanted to create this video because a lot of clients have been sending us CVs that are really not appropriate when you apply to jobs in Western universities. They'll have unnecessary information. The formatting will be a little bit weird. They'll look more like a professional resume than an academic CV, and they'll have various other problems with them. So by using this template and filling out all the information here with your own, you'll be able to have a strong CV that you could apply to academic jobs pretty much the way that it is. So how to use this document, all of the red text here is stuff that we want you to fill out. So you put in your name and your details and anything you see in red. The blue is just instructions for what you should do for each section. So when you actually submit this, you obviously want to delete the blue, and the black parts are ones that you could keep constant. So you just keep these in place and you fill out your information here with it. So with that, let's go ahead and go over this really quick. So the top of your CV, you want to put your name, your current position, your institution, and so forth. For your email address and phone number, it's totally fine if you put your work email address and phone number for this. In fact, that would be preferred rather than personal ones. This is a pretty straightforward section. We want to call your attention to the fact that we don't have a place for a picture. In some cultures, it is acceptable to put a picture on your CV, but in most Western contexts and a lot of places, it isn't appropriate. So we don't advise you to put a picture unless it's specifically asked for. Next, we want to highlight the education section. Here, you want to start with your most recent experience first. We'll sometimes see people submit this in the reverse order with their bachelor degree at top. You want to have your highest degree, your most recent degree up top here. Next, regarding the thesis and supervisor, these are both optional, so if you don't want to have them, you could delete them. But if you have a thesis topic that is particularly trending, or you have had a famous advisor in your field, it may be worthy to mention them, but you don't have to if you don't want to. The next section of the CV here is academic appointments. So this is your employment that you've had. So even if it's not academic appointments, even if you haven't had an academic appointment, you could put your work experience here. This is essentially a work experience section. But again, you want to list your work history starting with the most recent, and you should include your role, department, and institution. So here, for example, adjunct faculty, sociology department, University of Kansas, and you would do the same thing here for these roles here. Pretty straightforward. Next, we have research interest down here. So this section is totally optional, but it might be a good idea to include if you want to highlight the areas of research that you're doing now. Maybe your research topic has changed since the time you've written your dissertation or you've done your most recent publications. This could be a good chance to put your interest on here. Or if you're applying to postdoc positions, this could also be useful here. But what you want to do is you want to have like 3 to 8 words on the topics that you're interested in and the general research area of focus that you are currently engaging in. Next, we have the fellowships and grants section down here. This is a section where you'll list any awards, monetary awards, so funding that you've received to do your research. Including the amount is optional, but if you have received a fairly large research grant, probably more than 10,000 US dollars or more, you may want to include the amount here in this section. We recommend that you put these fellowships and grants up here if you're applying to research positions that will require you to do this on the job. If you haven't gotten any funding in the past, we recommend putting this a little bit further down. Likewise, you could also put this down if you are applying to a more teaching-focused position, but you do want to put this somewhere on your CV. And since many of our clients are in fact applying to research positions, we did decide to put it on page 1. Next, the bottom of the document down here, your name, curriculum vitae, page 1. This is a good thing to put on the bottom of it just to show that you're organized and you're writing a document that's easy to read and following good style conventions. So moving on, next section, publication. So this is obviously a very important section here. You want to list all of the publications and you want to start with the ones that are most relevant in your field. So this will be different depending if you're in a social science or a humanities field. For example, if you're in a social science field like sociology or anthropology, a book is usually expected for you sometime in your career, especially if you want to get a tenure track position. We recommend starting your publication section with books or any major manuscripts that you have produced. If you're in a field like psychology or in a harder science, books are less common. You may want to put your articles up top, but nonetheless, you want to be conscious of this distinction. The first section after books should be your peer review articles, just a very simple formatting here. So the name of your article, the journal that you published in, the volume and issue number, as well as the page numbers. Some people also include a little bit of a link to the article if you'd like. You don't have to, but you can do that as well. Next, book reviews. So any book reviews, if you're in a book review field, again, follow the simple format up here. So a review of blah, blah, blah book, who the publisher was, and where it was published. Something like this here is totally fine. Next, you want to include any manuscripts that you have in progress. And this is a question we get from people. What should I do if I have manuscripts that are under review, that I'm editing, or that I plan to submit later? Well, you should include these as well, because this will also be considered as a publication in your pipeline. And if you look here, we have some examples here. You want to begin by stating whether the work is currently being reviewed, if it's in progress, if you're planning to submit it. So you could say something like to be submitted or in preparation. You want to pretty much follow the same standards that you have above for the academic publications. Next, teaching experience. So here you list all of the courses that you've taught or the most relevant ones. Here you can do this section in a few different ways, so don't feel obliged to follow this format for this section especially. That's true of everything in the CV. If you have a different way of doing the section and you think it will be okay, then you can follow your own. This is just our recommendations and a nice little template you could use, but you can change this up a little bit. So what we have here is we have 2 university positions. So first one is first university, the most recent job. Following that is the second most recent job, and the red portions will be the courses that you've taught at these universities. So obviously for these part here, the XXX and the YYY, just plug in your own university and then list the courses that you've taught. I think this is a fine way of doing it. Next, moving down, we have service positions. So service positions are any positions that you have served in that were involving committee work or anything that you did outside of your normal responsibilities as, let's say, a teacher or researcher at a university. So there's a wide range of activities that you can include here. You could be comprehensive about what you put. Here, I've broken it up into a few different sections. So manuscript reviews here for articles and book reviews. So let's say if you got an article you got solicited to review an article and be the peer reviewer of it, you want to include that in how many articles you've done for that journal. Likewise, if you were ever offered a chance to review a book, you would want to include that here. I think many junior scholars probably haven't had this experience, but if you're more senior, you may have had this asked of you before. Next section, student advising. So if you've had a chance to be the advisor of students, this is another thing you could include here. So if you've ever mentored a student and been their thesis committee member or their supervisor for something, you can include that here. This includes things like senior honors thesis committee members and so forth. So any student that you've worked with in an advisory capacity, you should put here. Next, moving along to this part of the service. So we think it's a good idea to separate your external and internal service. So external service is anything you've done on a committee that isn't attached to your job directly. So let's say you're working at the University of Kansas, and you're on a committee within your department for hiring a new faculty. That would be an internal position, an internal service position, because you're doing it within the job that you are working at. However, an external position might be if you become a board member of a journal that isn't directly associated with your department or your university. This would be considered an external position. And we've put examples of these here. So an external position would be if you're a board member on a journal, or if you're a grant evaluator for a governing body that's outside of your institution. This would be an external position. Internal positions would be like things like this here. So treasurer, graduate student government of some position, sociology representative for the graduate student government. These things would be all done within your department or institution. Therefore, we'd consider them to be internal, and we think it's good to sort of separate these. You don't have to, but we think it's helpful. Also here, if you have a lot of board members, so if you have a lot of situations where you're the board member or you're an editor of a journal and you have more than 3 of them, it might be good to put all of these memberships in their own sections. Next, Media and public scholarship down here. This could be any non-peer review publications, opinion pieces, or public engagement pieces that you have produced. So here you have an example of a New York Times article, maybe an opinion piece or something you've written for a magazine, as well as a podcast appearance. This is becoming increasingly appropriate to put on CVs like this. So if you ever have been on a podcast, you could certainly talk about it here. You can list it here under the media and public scholarship section. Next, conference presentations. So this is a list of conferences that you have presented at. And you want to be a little selective about this here because some people we know have been doing academic presentations for 10 or 15 years, and they may have 4, 5, maybe 6 pages of presentations they could put. Now, we would challenge you to think whether or not they are appropriate to put them all, because your CV then will have a disproportionate amount of presentations on it relative to everything else, probably. So you may want to do something like, say, select conferences and presentations, where you only list a few of them and you don't put all of them, but you don't have to do that. It's totally up to you. But anyway, you do want to list some of the conferences and presentations that you have presented at and you've been involved with. So here, for example, we have a title of the conference paper that was presented. Then we said paper presented at the association for whatever conference, city, and the date, something like this. If you have a poster presentation, you can say something like poster presented at blah, blah, blah conference, city, date, like that here. And just follow this template for your own stuff like that. After conference presentations, we have invited talks. So the same principle applies. You want to give the title of your talk. You want to explain the context, so keynote speech, or if this was a classroom lecture or a Zoom talk, whatever it might be, you want to talk about that here. And you want to also list the venue as well. So the conference or venue, what was the nature of it, where did it happen, and what was the date. Now, if you have more than 1 or 2 invited lectures like this, you may want to put this above your presentations, your conference presentations, because these are a little bit more prestigious in some ways, but it's totally up to you. And if you only have 1 or 2 of them, it's totally fine to leave them after the conference talks. So this is something else you could include as well. Next, panel participation. So what we mean by panel participation is any participation in a conference or academic panel that did not involve you being a presenter. So some examples of this would be if you are the discussant on a panel, you're the mediator, maybe you're the organizer, whatever it might be. If you've been involved in a panel and you've been talking to people at a conference or venue, but you haven't been the one that's directly talking, this would be something that you can include as well. Next, down here we have honors and awards. You could put these a bit higher up if you'd like, but you do want to talk about any awards that you may have. If you don't have any of these, you could leave them off, but people who have received honors and awards do like to talk about them, like Outstanding Researcher Award, Teacher Award, anything like that. After that, we have fieldwork experience. So this is useful if you're in a discipline that requires you to go out into a field and collect research. So anything that can be considered fieldwork, you may want to include it here. Some people do, some people don't. I personally don't have it on mine, even though I have a PhD in anthropology, but if you do have any experience like this, you may want to put it. If you're in a field like archaeology or paleontology, something like that, you may want to include this because it shows that you are going out and doing a lot of work like this, but it's totally up to you. This is a very optional section here. Next, technical skills. If you have any, this could be useful if you're applying to positions that would require you to do qualitative or quantitative research. So again, this is a pretty optional section. I should make a note of that here to say that this is optional, but it is optional. You don't need to have this here. I don't have this on mine unless I'm applying to a job that I know will require me to use some of my quantitative skills. But anything here can to show that you have this background. Continuing education next. So if you have engaged in any form of learning or sort of formal educational activities where you've been the student, but it hasn't been in a degree context, you could include it here. So examples of this might be something like a remote learning certification, a diversity or ethics certification. Here I've listed Python for academic research, which could be another one to include, especially if you're in a discipline that requires you to work with Python in some capacity. This would be good to include as well to show that you're continuing to learn and to continuing to develop skills outside of your typical academic setting. Next, languages. So if you're in a field that will require you to use different languages, or if you're working with different languages, this would be good to put as well. You want to list them in the order that you're familiar with them or the order that's relevant to your research. So here, having this person CV that I put together here, this sort of fake person, they've clearly been doing research in Japan, so having Japanese would be a good skill. Obviously, if you're a non-native English speaker, you want to put that you're near native, or you have a full academic capacity, and any other languages that would be relevant you can include as well. And finally, professional memberships, any professional organization that you're a part of, this would be useful to include to show that you're engaging with the academic community. And that is all the sections we have on our CV. So you could use this to fill out your own CV, and since it could be difficult to figure out what to put and how to format things, you could use our template here to go and to fill out your own information and to use this to apply to academic jobs. If you follow the format here, this is a very suitable CV. You don't have to follow this 100%. You can be creative with it. This is just a template that we have to help you to structure your academic CV and to make sure you're not forgetting things and you have some sort of guidance as you do it. So please check out occidentbridge.com and download a copy of the CV. And if you have any questions about it, please feel free to reach out to us.